It's morning for me. I know it's not morning for most of y'all, but howdy. Today we are going to be reading code rather than writing code, and we'll be going. There goes my hair. And we will be going through the assistant for the Rasa for Beginners class on Udemy. So I'm gonna make sure this is all good to go. Fantastic. Oop, I don't have the live chat on. Hopefully YouTube's working. The stream hasn't started yet. There we go. Fantastic. All right. We're going to be going through the assistant for the Rasa for Beginners Udemy course, which is this one. It was put together by Mandy Mantha, who's a developer evangelist, I think, is her job title here at Rasa. It is free to take, so if you want to learn how to build this assistant yourself, I would recommend checking out the course. But today we're just going to go through the code and sort of talk about all the parts. And I actually haven't looked at this bot since it was upgraded to 2.0. So yeah, I think we should be looking at some of the code for the first time together. So what this assistant does, drink a coffee. So what this assistant does is it collects information from a user and saves it to an Airtable. An Airtable is just a service for sharing tabular data. So you could replace it with any sort of database that you wanted. In this case, this is just really an example of how to collect information and store it in some data structure that is not within your Rasa assistant. And I'm not going to run it because I don't want to go through and set up the Airtable API token, but the full walkthrough again is part of the course. So let's look at the actual code for the assistant. And when you look at a Rasa assistant for the first time, the best place to start is the domain file. So the domain tells your Rasa assistant everything it needs to know, all of the pieces of information, all of the, well, let's look at it, all of the intents. So these are all of the things that we will recognize the user wants to do. So the user can say, hello, they can greet the assistant, they can say goodbye. Affirm is like, yes, agree. Deny is like, no, disagree. Bot challenge, this is something that's included by default in all Rasa assistants when you initialize them. The user can ask if this is a bot and we'll get a truthful answer that yes, this is an automated assistant. Inform, this is a general catch-all intent that again, we use a lot in Rasa for any place where the user is sharing some piece of information. And then usually the piece of information that they're sharing will be collected either by slot filling or by named entity recognition or something like that. Thank you, the user saying thank you. Out of scope, this is a big sort of catch-all intent where we'll provide examples of things that people have asked about that our assistant can't do. So this is a wellness check-in bot, and they might want to know like, hey, can I book a personal trainer? And the bot might say like, oh, sorry, I can't do that. And then three other intents ask about lower stress, healthy eating, and exercise. And I think we'll get some more examples of what those look like in the data. And then the entities, so these are pieces of information that can be extracted from text that's been shared by the user, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Exercise, sleep, and stress are these things that we'll be keeping track of. And then here are all the things that our assistant can say. So all of the responses in this assistant have been hard-coded. So we've provided all of the text of all the things that it can say. And the things that it can say is utter greet. So hi, it's time for your daily wellness check-in. Tracking healthy habits is a great way to measure your progress over time. Would you like to answer a few questions about your health? Go back. There we go. The assistant can say goodbye. The assistants can say, I'm a bot powered by Rasa, and this is what it would reply. Well, we don't know that yet, but I'm telling you, spoilers, that this is what it would reply to the bot challenge. The assistant can ask if you exercised, what kind of exercise you did, how much sleep did you get, did you stick to a healthy diet, is your stress level low, medium, or high, if you have goals. And then we'll share the slot values that would have been extracted. And all of these are going to be done in a form, and we'll talk about the form. And then the assistant can say, no worries, so no problem, no, you're welcome is sort of like another sort of equivalent thing there. The assistant can ask if you want to continue, and then some things that the assistant will reply with in different situations. It's okay to feel overwhelmed at times. Try to set realistic expectations. So this is when the stress information is high. Exercise info. Most healthy adults today to get about 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week. More information about exercise. And then diet info, get lots of variety of food. And then we have slots. So you will notice that there are more slots than entities. Not every slot has to be filled by an entity. Entities are one way that you can fill slots, but there are other ways as well, and we'll talk about that when we look at the form. And a slot is just a piece of information that you want to remember. It's like a variable, right? So these are sort of initializing variables that will be filled by information from the user over the course of a conversation. And then we have some general session configuration stuff. So session expiration time at the end of 60 minutes, the session will end and a new session will start. And carry slots over to new session. When that timer goes out, the slots will all be cleared. And then we have a single form, health form, which is what's going to be used to gather the information for all the slots. That's then going to take that information and send it to the Airtable. So the domain file tells you all about your assistant, everything your assistant knows about. What it does not tell you is anything about the order of the conversation. And the structure that works, and it doesn't tell you, examples of what happens in your intents. And for that, we will go to the data. So in the data file here, we have two files. Wow. One is the NLU file, and one is the stories file. And it looks like these might actually need to be updated to 2.0, but the general principle is the same between 1.0 and 2.0. It's really just the surface level syntax markdown versus YAML. It's different. Quick break. Is there no new project you're going to do these days? Yeah, we'll be working on a new project, but I specifically had somebody ask me to do a code walkthrough of an existing assistant. So I thought it would be a good way to kick off the new year. Shiva, is there any document on benchmarks on compute needed when choosing different models on the pipeline? So Stacy, I'm assuming that Spacey needs more than 512 megabytes of memory, whereas Diet works with less than 512. That would be helpful. It's gonna depend. It will depend on the amount. So the specific amount of compute needed will depend on the model, but it will also depend on your specific project. So I don't know that we'd be able to give like information that would always be accurate there. But yes, I see how that would be helpful. We could probably tell you minimums, but I think most people probably wouldn't end up using just the minimum amount of compute. Yeah, let's look at the training data for the intents. And let's actually just look at the raw so we don't get the markdown formatting being interpreted. So the intents here, greet, goodbye, affirm, deny, etc., 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 are all intents that have been defined in our domain file. So we have an intent greet, and here's a bunch of examples of ways that somebody could say a greeting. So like, hey, hello, hi, good morning, good evening, hey there, hi. Goodbye, same thing. Affirm, same thing. And you don't have to provide an example of everything somebody could say, because we're going to, the way that Rasa works is to identify an intent. It's doing, it's treating it as a multi-class classification problem. And I think, I don't want to speak for every system out there, but I think a lot of dialogue systems do tend to use that model where it's a machine learning problem. So you're providing examples here rather than every single thing that somebody could say, and whatever algorithm you're using for your, whatever model you're using for your NLU, wow, another sip of coffee, will use these pieces of training information to sort of develop a better guess over time of what will go into that intent. And I'm assuming that this model is using diet, but we'll double check that when we look at the pipeline. So rough guidelines would be helpful. Yeah, that's a good idea. I will pass it on. Let me add a note. Because if I don't write down things these days, they immediately leave my brain like melting snow. Works. Okay. And I don't think we need to read through all of the examples here. This is just sort of, you know, to give you an idea of what you might do here. Something to note is that we have some examples here of entities. So remember, there were 3 entities defined in our domain file, and they were sleep, stress, and exercise. So here you can see that here 8 hours has been tagged as an example of sleep. So this is the amount of sleep that the person has. Here 4 hours has been provided as an example of sleep, and 6 hours. So these are all going to be used to train our assistant to detect and extract strings of text like this and assign them to this, extract them as a sleep entity, and then we can choose to assign them to various things and do different stuff with it. Same with stress, same with exercise. And then we also have other examples of, you know, the inform intent where there isn't an entity to extract. And then these sets of intents that I mentioned we talk about when we looked at them, this one is asking about, you know, lowering stress, this one's asking about eating healthy, and this one is asking about exercise in general. And if I had to guess, these will probably trigger that response that gives you more information about lowering stress, eating healthy, and exercising. So those are the training data for our system to identify what the user's trying to do. And then for stories, these are examples. Let's look at the raw again. These are examples of the ways that a conversation might go. So here, this is just like a little 2-turn example. If the user says goodbye, the assistant should say goodbye. If the user asks, hey, are you a bot? The assistant should say, yes, I'm a bot. And then to go through the survey, this is going to look fairly different in terms of forms for 2.0. But the person says hi, the assistant says hi, do you want to take a survey? If the person says yes, this form is filled out. And the slot values are repeated back to the user. The user says thank you. The bot says no worries, goodbye. And if someone takes the form and then asks something that's out of scope, the assistant will ask if they want to continue with the form, and if they don't, they'll stop the form. And if the user asks if they want to do something, if they want to continue the form, and the user says yes, then it'll continue the form. If somebody doesn't want to do the form, then the form won't be launched. If someone asks about, you know, exercise or eating healthy or lowering stress, the assistant will reply with the answer, the answer from the domain file. So these are pieces of training data. And if a conversation goes out exactly the way it's laid out here, the default of the assistant will be to do the exact thing that's been provided in the training data, right? So every time, you know, the user says hi, the assistant says hi, do you want to take the quiz? The user says no, the assistant should respond with, okay, bye. But because these are pieces of training data, right, that are providing our assistant and our dialect policy examples of the way the conversation could go, it should also be able to, you know, handle more variation. So even after the person says goodbye, if then say they ask, hey, I want to know about eating healthy, the assistant should be able to respond with that eating healthy information, right? Or if in the middle of doing the form, somebody asks, hey, I want to know more about exercise, the assistant should be able to respond about the exercise and then go back to doing the form. So you are providing examples here. The examples will be followed, but there's also a more, flexible ability to handle different different conversational paths. Yeah, checking out the chat. Suggestion for a project. Yeah, so to answer Faiz's question about having a machine learning classification algorithm that the assistant collects information for and is the front end, the dialect bot that we worked on for quite a while is actually exactly that. So I would check out those videos. That's a good example of how that works. Rashad says, Rasa installs deep learning libraries. If we have a smaller bot, is there any way to ditch unused packages for production? I mean, you can get rid of language models you're not using is probably like the easiest and quickest space savings. But yeah, you should be able to fine tune your install. I would probably do that by updating the Helm chart before you launch your Docker image. Is this 2.0 syntax? No, this is 1.0 syntax, but we do have backwards compatibility. Is it recommended to start all stories with greetings? It depends on you. Yeah, it really depends on your suggestion. So the sort of way that you could have an assistant start the story instead of having the user start the story would be to like the simplest way is to have in your your UI where someone's actually interacting with the assistant, the first thing, it looks like a turn, but it's just like text that you've provided and the people respond to that text and that's sent to the assistant as their first turn, and then the conversation continues from there. I want to apply for a job at Rasa. I would check out the careers page. I think there's contact information on the careers page, I'm pretty sure. Is Python code still required in Rasa 2.0 for forms? No, it is now in rules. Actually, is there in the... Oh, all right, never mind. I was going to say, actually, I think we're in the wrong branch. So let's go back to Rasa for beginners and let's see if we can actually... Yeah. Here we go. Okay, so here's the 2.0 version. And as you can see, it looks extremely similar. It's just the syntax is different. I can't believe I didn't look at the branch. More coffee. So previously we were looking at the 1.0 syntax. This is 1.x, and this is the 2.0 syntax. And we also have a little script that'll automatically do the migration for you. So if you're working in a 1.0 assistant, it'll change all of your training data. And stories, same thing, except the big difference here is the way that we are handling forms. So forms are a way of collecting multiple pieces of information without having to define a bunch of stories. It's like, I asked for this piece of information, they give it to me. I asked for this piece of information, they give it to me. I asked for this piece of information, they give it to me. So it's a way to loop through that process in a much more condensed syntax. So here the form is going to ask questions about, well, we can look at the form syntax in a second, but here it is, a health form is the name of the action, and we're going to continue to loop through the health form. And then if the user says something while we're looping through that out of scope, then we will ask if they want to continue, and if they don't, we're going to deactivate the form. So this is the bit here that creates the loop for the form, and you would just, replace whatever the form is with the name of your form in your own code if you were modifying this. And this is the example where we just go all the way through the form, no problems, all of our information is collected. So that is the syntax difference between 1.0 and 2.0. The other big thing is the way that forms are defined. So previously, forms were defined in the actions.py file, which is where you keep Python code that you want to be able to execute while your assistant is running. And it has to run on a separate server. And if you just have a form, you no longer have to have a separate server. You can instead do everything just in Rasa. So here we have our rules.yaml file, and this is where our form is defined. So you also might have noticed when we were looking at the stories here that we have fewer stories here. We just have more examples of longer conversations, and the small things that were like, if somebody asks if it's a bot, we say it's a bot, aren't there anymore. They've been moved to rules. So from the user experience endpoint, this should be, pretty much exactly the same. From our standpoint, we now know that every time we detect greet, we are always going to utter greet. Every time someone says goodbye, we're going to say goodbye. So if something is defined by a rule, it is always going to be exactly the same. They're much less flexible. They are much more reliable, which could be a really good thing for some situations. And we used to have multiple ways of doing this, and now they're all combined into a single rules file that defines the rules. So a lot of the things that were in the stories in the 1.0 assistant are now in the rules. And the most important rule here is this form. And the form is defined in the domain file, which we're going to have to go back and look at. I can't. Good morning. So this just says, all right, we're going to start the form. While the form is happening, we're going to go all the way through it. Once the form is done being gone through, we're going to submit the results, and this will send them to Airtable, I'm pretty sure, and then we're going to tell the user what was in those results. And then specifically what's in the form is going to be defined in the domain. So this is going to look, again, a little bit different than it did in the 1.x version, but not like super different, right? So the intents are all the same, the entities are all the same, the responses are all the same, the slots are type any rather than type unfeaturized. Unfeaturized is no longer supported, and you can just switch unfeaturized to any. And we have, instead of one action that's a form, we have two actions here. So one is the action that submits the results of the form, and then the other one is one that validates the information in the health form, and those will be defined in the actions file that we'll look at in a sec. And then we have the form. So we have one form here, right? All of these things are one form. You could have multiple forms. And we have multiple pieces of information that we are collecting with this form. So we have one confirming exercise, and there's multiple places where we could get, there are multiple ways that this slot could be filled. So if someone says something that we recognize as an infirm intent, we will set the value to true. If we say something that if somebody says something that we recognize as the deny intent, we will set it to false. And if we have something that we recognize as the inform intent, we will set it to true. And this is in response to this question, utter, ask, confirm, exercise. Did you exercise yesterday? The next one is exercise. So when we were looking at the training data, there are a bunch of examples of different types of exercise, like walk, run, kick, box. I didn't read them out loud, but I remember seeing them. And we will extract that entity information and then save it to this slot called exercise. There's also another slot we're filling called sleep. And we might get it from entities. So the examples of the entities there is like 4 hours, 6 hours, etc. And we would take the entity there. Or if we see that someone said, I didn't sleep, right, or something that was that we identified as having the intent deny, we would set the value to none. Stress we take from entity, so that was high, medium, and low as they were defined in the examples that were given in the NLU file, and then we would extract that entity and save it to this slot. And then we have this one, and we're just going to take text. So the question is like, did you have a healthy diet? Whatever text somebody inputs as the answer to that question, as long as the intent is one that we identify as inform, affirm, or deny, we're going to take that text and save it to this slot. And then goal, whatever text somebody enters, as long as we identify the intent is informed, we're going to save it to this goal slot. And if we ask about the goal and somebody says something and the intent is identified as deny, they'd be asked the question again to make sure that we get that slot filled. And the form will just sort of run through all of these slots in order and ask all of the questions that we've defined up here. And then it will execute the actions that it will validate the form and submit the results as defined in the rules. So let me double check in with the chat. Will we talk about custom actions? Yes. Bonala says, is the model sequence to sequence or some type of classification model? So there are... Yeah, so there's a number of machine learning models under sort of under the hood in Rasa, which you are of course welcome to modify and change as you like, and do tuning on. The main models are a classification model for identifying the intents, more like a detection model that identifies parts of the input that are in entities that have been provided as training data, or similar to entities that have been provided as training data. And then the thing that you should do next is sort of it's an ensemble model where it provides the sort of most likely next best option. So there's not really a lot of sequence to sequence learning in Rasa, but you could add it if you wanted. Christian says, is there a way to change the question utterance when the form repeats the question when a rule is detected? Yes, I would probably... You could do that as a rule, or you could do that as a custom action. So I think either of those would work. We'll also cover custom actions like using entities and fetching data from the database related to that entity. I think here we're pushing data to a database rather than fetching. But we'll go over it a little bit more. What will Rasa coding be next week? I don't know off the top of my head right now. Oh, does Rasa run on the new MacBook M1 chips? That is a great question. I have been seeing a couple of bug reports. I don't know that they are affecting everybody, and that's where I am right now. How can you include a confirm slot where the user gets shown all the given answers and has to confirm before the form will be deactivated? That's great. Great question. So let's actually take a look at the action submit results. That's where I would add that, would be as part of a custom action that triggers when the form is finished. Feza says, are slots and entities different things or the same? That's a great question. So a slot is a piece of information that the assistant is storing. An entity is a piece of information that has been extracted from text based on similar examples that have been given in the NLU file. So here we only have 3 entities. We have sleep, which is amount of sleep. We have exercise, which is a type of exercise, and then we have stress level, and all of those have had examples in the NLU file. The slots, there are more of them, right? And we're filling them in different ways. So you can fill a slot from an entity, very straightforward, or you can fill it, from the text that somebody enters, or, if you want them to press a button and then send the payload to be the value of the slot, you can also do that. So there are multiple ways to fill slots. And one of the ways is with entities. You could also have an entity that is extracted by the NLU that you don't do anything with. I just spilled coffee everywhere. This is what I get for gesturing. Yes, so that's the difference. I hope that's clear. Okay, so let's check out the custom actions and then talk a little bit more about some of the other stuff. So the form is defined in the domain file, and then when we run the form in the rules here, we are also triggering another action. We are triggering this action submit results. We don't have to say that we're triggering the form validation action because that will happen every time the form is triggered. So in our action file, we should have the validation action, and we should also have the submit action, which is going to be a little bit more complex here because it's sending stuff to Airtable. Okay, so it looks like this is, we're creating a JSON file that has a bunch of information in it. And then here we are validating the health form. And then here we are submitting results. So all of this is specific to setting up a JSON file that we're going to send to the Airtable API. And this could be anything, right? This could be any pushing to any database or pulling information from any database if you had, the appropriate credentials to do that. And we don't really need to talk about the imports. I don't think they're that important for this. So this validate health form is going to be run every time our form is run. And you can put additional things in here. So if you, for example, if the slot wasn't filled, you wanted to ask a different question, you could use the dispatch SDK function. I'm trying to remember like specifically where it is, and I don't, but you could dispatch a message here that then the user would reply to, and you'd save that information to the form. So here we're only doing one thing. We are looking at the confirm exercise. Okay, so let's see. So here, collecting dispatcher. Yeah, if value, return confirm exercise true. Else return exercise none, confirm exercise false. Okay, so it looks like we're just doing one little validation on one of our slots, confirm exercise. And then this is, again, run every time we run our form. And then the action submit results. This is what's happening when we're finished with our form as defined in our rules. And it is taking all of these slots. It is putting them into a JSON file using this, this function that's been defined up here. And then it's getting sent to Airtable. And I think that happens. Yeah, and that also happens in this this function out here. What program is this? We are looking at the Rasa for beginners assistant, and this is Python code that is a custom action that's being run by this assistant. Do we need an entity to store slots? No, you can have slots with no entities. For slot filling, do I need an entity declared in an NLU file? No. So you can fill slots with just the text. You can fill slots with, using some sort of programmatic logic like we do here during validation. You can, however, entities are an easy way to fill slots if they match what you're doing, if that makes sense. More coffee. Oh, it's getting cold where I spilled it. Good morning, everybody. Well, it's morning for me. Okay, so this is the custom Python code. In order for this to run, so you need a server that's running your Rasa assistant that handles the natural language understanding, the dialogue management, figuring out what to say next. And any Python code that you have running, you need to have a separate action server running there. It does not have to be Python code. It could be any arbitrary code. Our API is pretty well documented. It's just that Python is what we provide an SDK for. So it's the easiest, but it doesn't have to be Python. Let's talk about the config. So I'm talking about this last because, at least to get started, you shouldn't need to change this. This is where you define all the parts in your NLP pipeline. So you start taking in raw text. How do you get to the point where you pass it out, where you get out your entities and your intents and all of that? So this one is doing a couple of things. Can I just fill the slots from an intent instead of an entity? Yes, absolutely, you can. I think that's from underscore intent is the way that you do it there. Actually, I think there was an example. Let's go back to the form really quick so I can show you that. Yeah, here you go. So this one, for example, confirm exercise, can be extracted from the intent deny, and if the intent is deny is detected, then the value of the entity is set to false. So yes, a third way to do it that I don't think I mentioned. Config. So this is defining the whole NLP pipeline, the tokenizer, which is splitting the text into tokens, which in this case for English will correspond to words pretty well. The various featureizers, which take the text and turn it into numbers. The diet classifier. Diet is something that we've developed in-house. It's open source, and it does both entity extraction, so looking at the text and picking out the important bits, and also identifying the intents. Entity synonym mapper, so making sure that words that mean the same thing are handled in the same way, and then response selector. And then core, which is where you define how your assistant decides what to do next. So I mentioned if you provide a example conversation as training data and someone exactly does what's being done in that example conversation, it'll follow it through. So that's done by the memoization policy. That's not a typo, there's no R in that, it's memoization. The rule policy is what lets us use all the rules. So the one that submits our form after it's been filled out, the one that says if somebody asks if you're a bot, you say you're a bot every time. And then the TED policy is a transformer-driven policy. Again, it's an algorithm that we've developed in-house, open source, that looks at the history of the conversation and decides what the next best thing to do is. So if nothing has been provided that exactly matches the current conversation, if a rule doesn't apply, TED will look at all the possible responses and pick what it feels like is the most likely one based on the training data. So these settings should work for, certainly for English out of the box pretty well. If you would like to, do more tuning and experimentation, you can absolutely do that as well. Other things. Testing. And the way that we do testing in Rasa is you provide the way that you want conversations to go. So here, the user saying hello there, you want the assistant to say greet. The person says that I'm doing amazing, and the assistant says great. This testing is actually from a different assistant, so you probably want to change it for the exact assistant that you're working on, but that's what tests look like in Rasa. They do not test the action folder, the action server, they only test the Rasa server. So your tests for your Python code and your actions are going to have to be separate. You can ignore all of these. The other parts of the credentials and the endpoints are really more for deployment. So credentials here. If you are only using your assistant with REST endpoints and you're just serving it somewhere, you don't need to do anything. You just need to uncomment. Wow, uncomment the line that says REST. Wowee. And then just sort of various examples for various things. This is not a real Twilio account, it's just an example. And if you're using Rasa X, which is a free program that lets you, once your assistant's been launched, look at the responses that are coming in, annotate them, add them to your training data, retrain your model, and really do CI/CD with a machine learning model in production, specifically a conversational AI model. Not all of them. We don't cover everything. That's where you would set that up, and then any credentials that you need to connect your assistant to your endpoint so that it's available for folks. And then the endpoints. So this is where you define where to find your in this case your action server. So this is just running locally on this port. Yeah, and then the other stuff you shouldn't need to worry about to get going. So in order to modify the assistant and ask different things, we would really only need to edit the YAML files to get going. If you want more complex functionality, if you want to do more with your action server, then you would need to know Python to modify your actions. Yeah, I think that's mostly it for the walkthrough. I can see that there are questions. Shiva says, what is the best policy to recognize non-English names? Named entity recognition, I think it would depend on what type of names they were. So generally, named entity recognition is often done with like lookup dictionaries, and then also some like probabilistic things around it. And I would see if you can find, if you know that the names are going to come from like a specific language, see if you can find named entity recognition specifically for that language. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you might be looking for more like Indian names, and I know there's something, and I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but somebody was mentioning it to me. Yeah, I want to say there's something in Spacey. That seems probable to me. We were just talking about this. Remember when I said if things don't get written down by me these days, they just like melt away? This is one of them. Regenerex says, can synonyms work alongside lookup tables? In NLU YAML, I have subject abbreviations in a lookup table, and for each element, a synonym with the full name of the subject. Is this a good approach? Yeah, that should work. I mean, you could also just like provide both the full one and the abbreviation in your training data. It should work. Yeah, hopefully that helps. If the two slots have the same values, what's the best way to handle it? For example, if we have two slots named check-in date and check-out date. Okay, so you want to, if this is for a hotel, people should probably check out on a different date than they check in if they're spending at least one night in the hotel, assuming that it's, a hotel where you went by the night. For validation like that, I would do it as a form, right? I would do it as a form, and I would actually do that as a date entity using Duckling. So Duckling is a where's the form? Wait, we're in the wrong branch. Sorry. One sec. Let's go to the actual right branch. In the domain. So I would actually use Duckling to identify dates. For Duckling, you do not need to provide training information. It's a rule-based system that will extract dates. And I would do it from entity. And then as part of my validation, I would double check that they don't have the same value, is what I would do. Yeah, and you could even do, I was gonna say you could do an intent where one intent is check-in date and one intent is check-out date, but the likelihood that you're going to be able to reliably tell those two apart is low. Is very low. Yeah, I might even do it. Oh, it was. Yeah, sorry, I'm thinking about all the ways that it could go wrong. I would definitely do it with a form. I would do it. I think I might even do a rule. So, no, I think I do that in an action. So I check that like the checkout date is greater than the check-in date. And if it's not, I would ask them to confirm the check-in date. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I do. Sorry, I just talked through that whole thing in my head out loud. Does Rasa deploy on Discord instead of the Discord API bot? Yeah, it's definitely possible to build a Rasa assistant on Discord. I haven't. I know Vincent, who also does YouTube videos, was talking about it, but I don't know if he ever got around to it. Let's see if I can find a tutorial super quick. I don't see it off the top. I don't see it on like my first top 5 results. Yes, definitely possible. I have not done it. You need API access. Enrique says, how can you give or influence the most probable response? If you say hi, the response is hi, not hello, without a rule. Oh, that's really good. Okay, so this is where you have like multiple potential responses and you are selecting the correct one. If you have multiple responses to the same thing, I believe currently that they are selected at random. Oh, the last time I looked into that was in the 1.x timeframe, so that could be different in 2.x. I mean, I might set a slot without a rule. I mean, you could have the response be just whatever the bot said to you for certain intents, but I think that has the potential to have the bot say things that, like, repeat things back to the user that would be inappropriate. So, yeah, I might even have something like detecting formality. So have like 2 different. The easiest way is 2 different greet intents. One that's more formal, one that's less formal, and you have different responses: formal greet, informal greet. That's my answer. If you don't want to do a rule and you don't want to write any actions, I think that's going to be your easiest way. Anything non-spacey. Spacey is memory intensive. Yeah, you can definitely not use spacey. I wonder if we have any quick examples. I'm pretty sure this one. I'm trying to remember if any of these featureizers actually do. This one I know for sure is these are scikit-learn. I don't think that's spacey. Oh, it might be spacey. Yeah, so what you do is you would change your pipeline so you don't have any dependencies that are dependent on spacey, and then you can use something else. And of course, that's what you'd need to do for a language that's not supported by spacey. But yes, you don't. I mean, you also don't need to use Diet or TED. We just recommend them. We think they work pretty good. But yeah, it's completely customizable. How many coffees do I drink in a day? It depends. Usually, I probably don't drink more than 5, but they're also like smaller cups of coffee. I used to drink so much espresso. I live in Seattle. I love going out to get coffee. I haven't done it in almost a year, and it makes me really sad. But you know, at some point in the future, I will have coffee in a coffee shop again, and I'm really looking forward to it. Okay. Fraser says, why is the value true or false for slot filling from intent? That's a great question. So to figure that out, let's look at the domain. So that question was about this slot confirm exercise in the health form. And the reason is because the question is, did you exercise yesterday? So the reason that it's being set to true or false is just, I think Airtable handles Boolean slightly differently. So to make sure that the data type is correct. And then for the validation, I believe what this does is if the answer was false, then utter ask exercise is set to none, I believe is what the validation is doing. Yeah. Lewis says regex featureizer is not spacey. Yeah. Does diet have a spacey dependency? I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah. Yeah, it's, your I think one of the benefits of using Rasa is that it's completely customizable, right? We're open source. If you wanted to like fork the whole project and do your own thing, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could. So yeah, really, really flexible, really customizable. The sort of like the flip side of that is that, and we're actively working to make this easier. Is that it can, I think, be a little bit overwhelming sometimes to get started. So that's why we did that change in 2.0 where you don't have to mess with a config file when you're just getting started. Like you don't have to understand the whole NLU pipeline to train your first assistant. You can start with more the text-based stuff, providing your training data, writing your intents. And then as you have, time and capacity and desire, you can begin to fine-tune your model and try things out. And for example, try to remove spacey from your dependencies. So yeah. Paul says, when using Rasa Interactive, if you see your bot predict inaccurately, do the changes you make affect the accuracy of the bot in the future? That's a great question. So interactive learning is, you can do it in the command line, I believe. You can also do it in Rasa X, and there's a nice little UI for that. So what happens is your bot says something, you respond as a user, as if you were a user. Your bot says something, you can change the bot's response. So what you would do is you would take that information, you would add it to your training data, and then retrain your model. So it's not going to, as you're having a single conversation, improve over time. What you're doing is you are providing better and better training data and better examples of what your assistant should be doing. And then when you retrain, then your assistant should be able to handle situations like that better. So it won't improve like as you talk to it in real time, but it should improve as you iterate over time. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, it's not doing online training, which I guess you could, again, we're open source. If you really wanted to set it up to do that, you could, but it would be expensive is how I would put that if you tried to retrain your model every turn. Can you tell us which algorithms or models are used for a list of pipelines and policies? Yeah, so I think probably the easiest way to do this is to go to the config. So the sort of the difference between policies and pipeline components is that policies are all about helping your assistant decide what to say next, and pipeline components are all about helping your assistant to take in the text data and put out, the machine readable representation of the information in that data that your assistant then uses to decide what to say next, right? Just to sort of go over them at a high level, a language model is a statistical model of what words are likely to come next. This can be helpful in a range of things. If you're familiar with GPT-2 or GPT-3 or BERT or the new Google one, skip transformers, I think. I don't think you can just use that. I think that's just like a thing that they've shared via research paper. That's what those are. Tokenizers break text up into tokens. So these could be words. They could be things like smaller units of meaning. They could be characters, which is one way to, or like small character slices, which is one way to handle spelling variation. Featureizers take, your tokens or whatever it is that you're using as the input and then turns them into a numeric representation of the text. And then there's a bunch of different ones. Intent classifiers take in a turn of text and assign it to one of the intents that you have defined. And entity extractors look at the string of text and pick out the specific pieces that are, entities that you have defined that you might want to sort as lots or might want to use for other purposes. Then a selector predicts the bot response, and you don't really need to worry with that. Most of that is being done in the policies. And then for the policies, they are ways of picking what to say next. So the machine learning ones learn based on examples that you provide. The rule-based policies are if X, then Y, and then they have various features that you can change. So I hope that's helpful. And then we have a number of NLP for developer videos that talk about different things. Slightly more focused on the pipeline, and then a number of algorithm whiteboard videos slightly more focused on the policies, and also some of the pipeline components. If after your bot responds to a user with a question, you want the bot to ask, were you satisfied with the answer, yes or no? How would you do that? So I would probably do that as a rule if you want it to happen every time, always. If you, it's not important that it always happens every time, then I'd probably do it as a story, which will, most likely happen, but someone could be able to interrupt it, right? Whereas opposed to if you had a rule, someone would have to say yes or no, right? That makes sense. I mean, they wouldn't have to, but that's what the assistant would be expecting. You give us some advice regarding open source frameworks to monitor logs for analytics purposes. For Rasa, yeah. I mean, I think the Rasa answer is that, logs are great, but they will only tell you so much, and you really need to look at what people are saying to your assistant and react to their what works for them and what doesn't work for them. I'm trying. I was gonna say something about Rasa X and logging, but I'm not 100% sure that I'm right about it, so I'm not gonna say it. But I think that's slightly outside of what I want to say. Coffee. Sorry, it's a good question. I don't have a great answer right now. Coffee. Okay, so to just reiterate, wow, there's no way. Yeah, no, okay, and this is again, this is sort of like an old test. A data classifier uses a bag of words model to find intent, and CRF for extracting entities, but for TED policy, form policy, and memoization policy, which algorithms or models are used? So for the form policy and memoization policy, it's basically a rule. The model is what you provide in your domain file and your rule file. For TED, thanks Louis, for your understanding. For TED, TED is itself an algorithm, and I think there's a algorithm whiteboard on it that Vincent did that goes into a lot more detail than I have mental capacity for right now. Ugh. I had my headphones in the whole time. I don't usually wear headphones for these. Good morning. So to quickly just go over what's in here, the data is your training data, NLU for understanding what your user says, rules for things that always have to happen in a specific order, stories, examples of things that you want your assistant to do and ways that you want them to respond. You want your assistant to respond in different situations. These you can all ignore right now. Actions.py is where you have Python code that you want to be executed while your assistant is running. Config is where you define your NLU and dialog policy pipeline. You don't need to mess with that right off the bat until you're ready to. Credentials and endpoints help your credentials are where you have your credentials so that you can interact with other pieces of software. And endpoints is where you define your endpoints for your assistant. The domain is where you define everything that your assistant knows about. And that's the last one because we don't, and this is just a requirement stock for installing the correct package versions. So in sort of order of importance or what I would change in what order, I would start with the domain and then the data, and then iterate back and forth on those and retrain and test your assistant. And I think that's going to be, you know, the majority of your early work on your assistant, and then adding actions once you're ready to add a little bit more functionality. And then if you want to start playing around with the sort of underpinnings and the NLP parts of it, maybe playing around with the config, and then the credentials and the endpoints you would need to update when you're ready to launch your assistant, and then testing, update your tests. And you can also automatically generate tests from conversations in Rasa X. So that is the slightly meandering code walkthrough, more like a code wander through, I would say, for the Rasa X assistant. We started in 1.x, and then I figured out where the 2.0 is. Yeah, and that is the assistant. And if you want to learn how to build this assistant, the Rasa for Beginners course, again, on Udemy, totally free. We'd be delighted if you took it. If you have other questions, the Rasa docs are on 2.0. There's also legacy docs for 1.x if you're working on that. And then the forum, and I should have a little forum pop up. The forum, if you have any additional questions. Yeah. Oh, and folks are jumping in with logging. Thank you. Thank you for helping out. I appreciate that. All right. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. I think it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. Have a great Martin Luther King Jr. Day, everybody. Yeah, celebrate by working towards justice, I guess. And I'll see y'all on Wednesday for Q&A, Rasa office hours with Karen, who is fantastic. She's really great. I'm really looking forward to it. And I will talk to y'all then. Save up your questions. Same time, 9 a.m. Pacific. And yeah, should be a good time. I'll see you then. Bye.